Yeah, so it's my pleasure to introduce Alan. Alan has dedicated his life to training Christians to thoughtfully articulate their faith and values. Prior to training Christians, Alan worked in hospital-based physical therapy for 10 years. He trained people who could no longer walk, stand, or even sit to rebuild their strength, gain confidence, and physically achieve their former levels of function. The positive reaction he received from students and coworkers propelled him to turn his full-time attention from physical bodies to spiritual ideas. And that transition brought him to work with Stand to Reason, where he is now. Alan's work represents the best in Christian thinking and the art of conversational persuasion on challenging issues of the day like evolution, abortion, relativism, homosexuality, euthanasia, cloning, and Islam. Alan graduated from California State University, Long Beach, and holds a Master's of Arts in Christian Apologetics from Biola University. Please join me in welcoming him.
Yeah, so many years ago, before I was working as a speaker and a teacher, I worked, as I mentioned, as a physical therapist, and I worked in East Los Angeles. And if you know anything about East LA, you probably know East LA is a very ethnically diverse city. So people from all over the world travel to Los Angeles to live and work there. And one of my coworkers, who was also a physical therapist, was from India. He moved there and was working as a physical therapist. And one day he invited me to have lunch with him. His name was Raj. I said, sure, Raj, let's go out to lunch. So we're in East LA, we're eating fish tacos, which fish tacos are super popular in Southern California. And my friend Raj proceeds to tell me the news. I said, what is it, Raj? He goes, Alan, I'm going to be getting married. And I'm like, oh, Raj, I'm so happy for you, That's wonderful, congratulations. And so I asked my friend Raj a question. I said, Raj, are you going to have like an American-themed wedding, or are you going to have more like a Hindu-themed wedding? He said, I'm going to have a Hindu-themed wedding. And I said, oh, cool. So I asked him another question. I said, Raj, is Hinduism something that's important to you? And he said, yeah, Hinduism is important to me. I said, cool. So I asked him another question. I said, Raj, do you believe Hinduism is true? He thought about it for a moment, and he goes, yeah, I think Hinduism is true. I said, cool. So I asked him another question. I said, Raj, do you believe all religions are true? Like not just Hinduism, but Buddhism and Islam and Christianity and Judaism and so on and so forth. And he thought about that question for just a moment. He goes, yeah, I think pretty much all religions are basically the same. Now, at this point in the conversation, I came to realize my friend Raj is what we would call a religious pluralist. Like, obviously, that's not the term he used, but this is simply the idea that you think all religions are true. You can't say any one religion is more true than another, and you can't say any one religion is more false than another. Now, as a follower of Jesus Christ, those are not my convictions. And so I really wanted my friend Raj to abandon this idea that it's possible that all religions are true. And so I asked him one final question. I said, Raj, what do you think about a religion that believes that there's a God who is physical in nature? So he's just a physical being. This God is the size of a football field. This God hovers on the far side of the moon. So you can't see this God with a telescope. And this God is responsible for controlling the weather patterns on our planet. I said, would you believe in a religion that teaches that? Or would you think that that religion that teaches that is also true? And he thought about it for a moment. He goes, no. He goes, okay. He goes, all right, I take it back. He goes, not all religions are true, only the ones that make sense. And so notice, he now backed away from his initial claim that he thought all religions could be true. Now, I want you to notice what I didn't do in that conversation. Notice I didn't tell him he was wrong. Notice I didn't tell him that religious pluralism is false. Notice I didn't tell him I was a Christian or even defend any aspect of my own Christian views. Yet I was still able to persuade him to abandon this idea that it's possible that all religions could be true. And what was the only thing I did in that entire conversation? You tell me.
Ask questions.
That's right, ask questions, right? Not just any random questions, but a certain line of questioning such that as he answered the questions in his own mind, it was almost as if his own thoughts were convincing him of the idea that I wanted to believe. In fact, had I said to him, "Oh, Raj, you believe in religious pluralism. That's false for 3 reasons. Let me tell you what they are." It's far more likely his defenses would have gone up and he would have become more resistant to the idea. But because I engaged him using questions, his own mind, in a sense, convinced him of the idea. And this is the habit that I want you to learn to get into as well, is learning to use questions and to engage people using questions, especially if you're talking about your Christian convictions. And so let me offer you a promise. We have about 50 minutes here this afternoon, and my promise to you for this session is this. I promise to give you a game plan that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, on any topic, no matter how little you think you know about the topic, and no matter how articulate, educated, or aggressive the other person that you're talking to might be. So that's my plan, that's my promise, is to give you a game plan that will allow you to do that, right? Now, before we get into that, let me ask you a question. When you think about sharing your faith, your convictions with someone who's not a Christian, say it's an atheist or a Muslim or maybe an abortion choice advocate, when you think about that potential encounter, how would you rate how you feel about that potential encounter? Are you the kind of person who's a number 1? Are you the kind of person who's like, I relish that encounter. I can't wait to talk to people who don't share my faith. Where are they? I want to go talk to them right now. Or are you number 2, where you're like, I'm willing to talk to other people about my faith, but honestly, I'm nervous, I'm uncertain, and I'm scared. Or would you say you're a 3? You're like, I pee my pants every time. We have to be done in a second. Let's say, or you try to avoid it, okay? So I'm curious to know, raise your hand if you're a number 1. Do we have any number 1s in the audience? Oh, we do, okay. That's good. Usually there's like a small percentage of people. How many are you number 2? Okay, let's see. How many number 3? You try to avoid it. How many will raise your hand no matter what? I see those hands. Okay, so for those of you who raise your hand at a number 1, you can take a nap for just a few minutes, all right? I want to talk to those of you who are 2 or 3, or who didn't raise your hand. And I want you to tell me, why are you nervous, uncertain, or scared, or why do you try to run the other way? Like, what's the concern? Rejection. Okay, you're afraid of rejection. That's right, totally reasonable concern. You're afraid that you'll present your views or whatever, and either your ideas will be rejected, or maybe you'll be rejected. Okay, yeah, what else?
I don't like conflict.
Okay, yeah, you don't like conflict. Like, you feel like if you start talking about your convictions, you guys might end up in an argument, and that's a kind of conflict that makes you feel uncomfortable. Totally reasonable concern. Yeah, behind.
Give the wrong answer.
Okay, yeah, you might give the wrong answer. Yeah, sure. You feel like, man, I don't know if I know enough, and perhaps I'll give the wrong answer. Jesus is the Archangel Michael. Wait, no, he's not. He's I'm just kidding. Not that.
I'm not quick on my feet, so I feel like I get caught off guard and I know the answers, but I can't.
Yeah, it's like you know the answers, but maybe you're not quick on your feet to be able to answer it in like a situation where it's like a kind of a give and take. And sometimes you get kind of like a brain block. That's how I feel sometimes too. Totally reasonable concern. What else? Yeah, over there? Sorry, over there.
That at the end of the encounter, it's going to seem like my faith doesn't have enough reason to rest on, and that it's not well grounded.
Oh, so you're concerned that maybe after that conversation, you'll feel a little bit skeptical or doubtful about your own convictions?
No, I'll still have that anchor and be convicted,
Yeah.
but I just won't be able to convey that.
Oh,
It'll
yeah,
look like I don't have enough good
Got it.
reasons.
God, you don't have the reason to be able to convey that to the person. Yeah, totally reasonable concern. Yeah, what else? Yeah, over here.
I'm intimidated by people who I think are smarter than me.
Sure, you're intimidated by people who you think are smarter than you. Yeah. There's a couple seats here. Are these all open? 2, 4, 5, 6 seats in the front. So if you're willing to trek over to the front, we'll be sure to embarrass you. We will be sure not to. Yeah, so these are all legitimate, reasonable concerns that put you at a number 2 or 3. Now, by the way, when I answer this question, I put myself at a number 2. So I'm also willing, but I'm oftentimes nervous, uncertain, and scared. And sometimes I run the other way. Now keep in mind, I'm the guy that, in the States at least, I'm the one who oftentimes will get invited to a secular university, and they'll say to me, Alan, we want you to present your views, your Christian views on some position that you hold, like say on abortion, like my views against abortion. We'll give you 20 minutes to present your case against abortion to the university audience. We're going to put 2 microphones up on stage. People are going to line up. The first person's going to raise an objection, and you have to debate them. Then the person in this line, you have to debate them. And we go back and forth for an hour and a half. Do I relish that encounter? No! I mean, I'm willing, but I'm nervous, uncertain, and scared. And many times I try to avoid it. I oftentimes turn down those events. Why? Because of exactly the same reasons that you all just said. Those are my exact concerns. So notice the problem isn't that we have those concerns. That's a normal thing. Like, we're all human, we all have the same kinds of fears. I would say that it only becomes a problem when those fears or those concerns paralyze you from ever engaging people in conversation. It's only a problem when they prevent you from ever taking a step and engaging someone else about your convictions. And that's why I believe if you learn the right tactics, if you learn the right tools of engagement, you can have the confidence to engage people even though you have those fears, even though you have those concerns. Now, before I show you an example of this great tactic that I want to teach you, I want to first show you an example of a bad tactic, a bad approach. And I can't think of a better way to do that than to show you a video clip from the movie Nacho Libre. Now, how many here have seen Nacho Libre? Raise your hand. Well, wait a minute. How many have not seen Nacho Libre? Raise your hand. That's a lot of non-Christians here. That's remarkable. Okay, well, hey. Okay, so since many of you have not seen it, quick summary. Nacho Libre is a comedy. So the guy on the left is the actor Jack Black, well-known Hollywood actor. And it's a movie, and he plays a character of a guy named Nacho Libre, who is a Mexican wrestler. Okay. Now, this guy to the right there is his wrestling partner. Okay, so they're partners, and they're Mexican wrestlers. Jack Black's character, Nacho Libre, he is a Catholic Christian. Now, in the video clip I'm about to show you, they are both about to wrestle these 2 guys who are named Satan's cavemen. Okay? And so Nacho has this weird idea because his wrestling partner is not a Christian and hasn't been baptized. And Nacho feels like that's a problem. That's going to be an obstacle to them succeeding in their wrestling match. So I want you to see what tactic Nacho uses to convince his friend to get baptized. Let's take a look.
I'm a little concerned right now about your salvation and stuff. How come you have not been baptized?
Because I never got around to it, okay? I don't know why you always have to be judging me. Because I only believe in science.
But tonight, I just thought it would be a good idea if you felicidades.
Now, I don't know in Canada what approach you guys use in baptism, or that's the same way they do it. Obviously, that's an alternative form, right? So what's the problem with this approach to baptism? Why is this not an effective way to baptize someone? It's what? Yeah, he's forced to do it, right? So do you think this friend of his now is more or less convinced that getting baptized is a good idea? Less, right? He's less convinced because he was forced to do it, and oftentimes we naturally push back against things that we're pressured or forced to do. And I think this is oftentimes a picture of the way we Christians come across to our non-Christian friends and family. Because we're so eager for them to come to know Jesus that we oftentimes make a lot of statements. We tell them, hey, you got to believe in Jesus, God wrote the Bible, right? It's the Word of God, Christ died for your sins, you got to plead the blood. And so we make statement after statement after statement after statement after statement, telling them what they got to believe or what they got to do, and it comes across like we're just trying to dunk their heads in the water. They feel like we're pressuring them, And so naturally their walls go up and they become more resistant to what we're trying to suggest for them to do. And that's why I say we got to take a different approach. And the different approach that I want you to learn and to use is what I call the Columbo tactic. Now, how many have ever seen the TV show Columbo? Raise your hand. Oh, okay, there's my Christians. All right, yeah. So if you haven't seen it, it's okay. It's an old show. It's, Peter Falk, the actor here, has passed away. But in the TV show, he's a lieutenant, right? And in every TV episode, it begins with a crime happening. So you as the viewer see the crime, you see the person who committed the crime. And then Lieutenant Columbo comes to the scene, and he looks completely inept, completely incapable of achieving his task. Sometimes he's wearing a trench coat. It looks completely wrinkled, as if he slept in it, right? Or maybe his hair, his hair's like off to the side of his head. He's got like really bad bedhead. He pulls out a piece of paper to take notes of the crime scene, and he doesn't even have a pen or a pencil. It's like, anyone have a pen or a pencil? And everyone's looking at him going, this is the lieutenant? Like, he's going to figure out the criminal is, right? But the genius of Columbo is he then begins to just ask really calm, disarming questions. So maybe he'll ask one of the people, hey, he'll say, what do you do for a living? And the guy's like, well, I'm an engineer. And Columbo's like, oh, you're an engineer? Oh, okay, that's really great. What do you design? He goes, well, I design bridges. And Columbo's like, oh, you design bridges? Okay, great. And everyone's like, what does that have to do with the investigation? Like, how is this guy getting any progress done here? And then Columbo, as he begins to walk off and say, hey, thanks for letting me, bother you, starts to walk off and he stops and he says, but something about this thing's bothering me. I got one more question. I got one more question. And he just one more questions them to death. But basically he asks really calm, disarming questions that gives him enough information to figure out and put the pieces together of the puzzle to figure out who the criminal is. And of course, at the end, he always solves the crime. So this is why we call this tactic the Columbo tactic. Because at its core, what this is about is using questions instead of statements to make your point or to move forward in the conversation about your faith and your convictions. By the way, you can use this tactic on anyone, not just non-Christians, but even on your friends, your family, other Christians, your spouse. Be careful. But at the end of the day, all this tactic is about the art of asking questions and engaging people in conversation in that disarming way. Now, what are some of the benefits of asking questions? Like, what do questions do for a conversation, or how do they make people feel? What do you think?
Engaged.
Yeah, over there.
So when you're asking questions of someone else, they're talking about themselves, and people like that.
That's right. People love to talk about themselves or share their opinions. So that's one benefit. Good. Now, what's another benefit of asking questions in a conversation? Yes?
It causes them to think through what they really believe for themselves.
Yes. Yeah. When you ask a question, it forces them to think about their view. And even the process of saying that view out loud forces them to process it in a way. And sometimes when they say their view out loud, it doesn't sound as compelling as when they had a thought in their mind. Yeah, over here.
Yeah, you're not stating a contention that you have to defend.
Ah, okay, very good point. Yeah, so you're not stating a contention. So if you're not making a claim, you don't have to defend your view then. And by the way, we're going to get to that in a moment. That's actually a hugely important point. I saw another hand in this area. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not making any judgments.
Okay, yeah, so technically speaking, you're not making any judgments, right? You're just asking a question about their view. Yeah.
Might narrow down what they're actually trying to talk about.
It will narrow down
what they're actually trying to get at.
Okay, so by asking questions, you're saying like you can then hone sort of the conversation. Okay, yeah, that's right. You can limit the scope of the conversation. Sure, absolutely. Anything else? Yeah.
Treating their views with respect.
Okay, yeah. By asking them a question, you're treating them with respect by virtue of you asking, hey, what is your view? I want to know and I want to understand it. Yeah, one more.
It also plays into removing the feeling of being adversarial because you're playing into their moment of emotional comfort.
Yeah. So it removes the feeling of being kind of adversarial because, again, so long as you're asking questions like Columbo and not like I would say FBI interrogator, but you guys don't have. You guys have FBI here, you don't have FBI. What's your version of FBI?
CSIS.
CSIS?
Yeah.
How do you spell that?
Canadian Security.
Oh, C. Oh, I see. Oh, I see. Yeah. So provided you're not like a CSIS interrogator, right? and you're asking questions in a calm, disarming way, you're right, it's not going to come across as adversarial, right? And again, those are all true. I mean, I think questions can allow you also to be able to make your point sometimes without ever stating your case, right? We also know Jesus was a master at asking questions. Somebody counted how many questions he asked in the Gospels. It's like 284, right? Why is he asking so many questions? Is it because he doesn't know anything? Well, no, because he knows the rhetorical power of engaging people's minds by asking them questions, and that's why he used it. Right? I love what Francis Schaeffer said. He was a great apologist, a great thinker and philosopher, and just had a genuine love for people. And listen to what he says about the power of questions. He says, if I have only an hour with someone, I'll spend the first 55 minutes asking them questions and finding out what is troubling their heart and their mind. And then, in the last 5 minutes, I'll share something of the truth. It's kind of remarkable because I bet a lot of us would think that suppose we had a neighbor who was a Muslim, and we gave that neighbor 55 minutes out of the hour for them to share about their faith, about their religion, about their values, and we only took 5 minutes at the very end to share something about Jesus. I bet a lot of us might be tempted to think that we wasted our opportunity, like we totally blew it, right? Well, why were you giving them that much time? Or maybe you have a friend who identifies himself as gay or lesbian or non-binary or trans, and we give them 55 minutes out of the hour to share about their life, about their feelings, about their upbringing. Maybe they had certain experiences in the church. And you only take 5 minutes at the end to share something about what you believe to be is true. A lot of us might be tempted to think, oh man, we squandered our opportunity. We totally blew it. But Schaeffer says, no, by all means, we should take that time to invest in them, to ask them questions, to find out what is going on deep inside their soul. So that when you do share something in those last 5 minutes, that thing that you share will be exactly what they needed to hear. And you'll know what they needed to hear because you first invested in them and spent the time, 55 minutes, asking them questions to better understand who they are, what's going on in their life. Now, there are 2 kinds of Columbo questions that I want you to commit to memory. And these should all be in your notes, which hopefully everyone has here, right? There's 2 kinds of Columbo questions. The first Columbo question, its function or its purpose is to tell you what a person believes. It's to help you to gain information, tell you what is their view. And here's the key question that, by the way, I use in almost every conversation I have. What do you mean by that? Hey, what do you mean by that? Now, to be honestly, it doesn't have to be those exact words. I just like to have something memorized so that it flows easily off my lips, right? Because when you repeat a phrase or a term, it becomes part of your motor memory. So if your question wanted to be, hey, tell me more about that, or define for me that term, or something like that, that's totally fine. But whatever you choose, just make it something that you use all the time. And so I like, what do you mean by that? It's easy, anyone can say it, and it's very straightforward, right? So let me give you some examples, right? I'm talking to somebody, and they say to me, Alan, hey, all religions are basically the same. Now, I'm not an expert in world religions, that's not what I studied, but I do know enough to know that all religions are not the same, and chances are you do too, right? But even though I know that's not true, my first response back to them is not to say, no, that's not true, you're out to lunch. My first response is the Columbo question. And so my question to them is, interesting. Hey, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by they're all the same? Now think about it for a moment. You don't know what they mean by they're all the same. Maybe they mean by the same, they mean all religions believe in the same God. Or maybe they think all religions have the same moral viewpoints. Or maybe they mean all religions have the same methodology of getting into heaven. And so you don't know what they mean by that phrase. And so when you ask them, hey, what do you mean by that? They'll tell you which of those 3 things is in their mind or something else. And then now you'll better understand exactly what their view is. Okay? People say the Bible isn't reliable. Now, I'm not an expert in biblical reliability. I'm not a scholar in biblical manuscript or anything like that. But I could, off the top of my head, give a 20-minute refutation against such a claim. But I don't. I make my job 10 times easier by just simply asking the Columbo question. I'll say, hey, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by the word reliable? Now think about it, you don't know what they mean. Maybe by reliable they mean the Bible isn't a reliable source of history. Maybe they mean the Bible isn't reliable when it's addressed scientific matters. Or maybe they mean the Bible hasn't been reliably transmitted for thousands of years, such that what the biblical authors wrote is what we have in our Bibles today. So when you ask them, what do you mean by that? They'll tell you which of those three things or something else that is in their mind, and now you'll understand exactly what their view is. Okay? I'm pro-choice. Again, most people think, well, pro-choice just means I support abortion rights at every moment in pregnancy for all 9 months for any reason. But that's actually not the case. A lot of people have much more nuanced views. Some people say, well, I'm pro-choice when it comes to abortion in the case of birth control, or I'm pro-choice for the first trimester, but not the third, or whatever. So again, just because someone says I'm pro-choice, it doesn't mean you know exactly what they mean by that. So I always ask the Columbo question, hey, what do you mean by pro-choice? You can do this with all kinds of topics, evolution, stem cell research, euthanasia, whatever it might be. At almost any topic that's brought up in conversation, you can ask the question, the Columbo question, what do you mean by that? And that'll tell you more about their view, and it'll help you to better understand what they're talking about. So think about this. That question has all the benefits of questions in general, right? It shows interest in their view. It shows that you care about them and you respect their views. It tells you more information about them. By the way, it also buys you valuable time. Have you ever been in a conversation and someone raises an objection, like maybe the Bible isn't reliable, and you're like, oh no, I don't know what to say. So you say, hey, what do you mean by that? Well, now that person's going to take a few minutes to maybe answer that question and unpack their views. Guess what you can do at that point? Yeah, pray, right? Take a deep breath, collect your thoughts, right? Maybe, pay attention to what they're saying. Maybe something they say will trigger your memory. Oh man, I remember going to the Equip conference and I heard Wesley Huff talk about the trustworthiness of the Bible, or whatever it might be. So sometimes by them answering that question, it'll give you more material to work with, and it'll help you to remember something. But the ultimate reason for asking this first Columbo question is so that you understand what they believe for two reasons. One, so you don't misunderstand them. But number two, so you don't misrepresent them. And that's an important concern because a lot of us tend to make that mistake. In fact, there's a term for what it means to take someone's view and misrepresent that view in such a way where now that view looks more foolish and easier to attack. And then you attack that view that's not their view instead of what they actually hold. Does anybody know what that term is? Yeah, straw man. So it's called a straw man fallacy. And the reason it's called that is because of this concept. So imagine I show you a picture of, or you run across Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, right, the famous actor. Now this guy is this big, hulking guy, and trying to take him down would be intimidating, right? This guy was a professional wrestler at one point. But what if I take Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and create a straw man version of him, right? Notice, this is a characterization of a real person, but made to look a lot easier to attack, right? If you had the option of choosing to knock down one of these two, what would you choose? Obviously the straw man, right? But that's not the real thing. The Columbo tactic will help you to avoid taking someone's view and misrepresenting it in such a way where now the view looks a lot easier to attack, okay? Because you'll understand what they actually hold. And if you end up criticizing or responding to a view that a person does not hold, then they'll start to wonder, are you even listening to me? Because basically you're attacking a view they don't even hold. They're like, okay, it sounds like you're just having a conversation with yourself. So the Columbo tactic will help you prevent that mistake. Now, Remember, I told you there's two questions, two clump of questions. The first clump of question I just told you, which is, what do you mean by that? Okay. But I want to teach you a second clump of question. And the purpose of this question will tell you why they believe what they believe. And it'll do what I believe is the most important point of this talk, which is to reverse the burden of proof. We'll get to that in just a moment. First, let's unpack this. What is an argument? Can anyone give me a definition, not like a dictionary definition, but just like a rough definition of an argument? And by the way, I'm looking for two components to this definition. Anyone take a stab at it? Yeah.
Premise and conclusion.
Okay, premise and conclusion. That's very technical. I like that. Okay. So can you put it in layman's terms? Like, so conclusion. All right. So conclusion is your view, right? So you have a view, which is your conclusion. Okay. Some might say that's your opinion. Okay. But merely having a conclusion or a point of view or an opinion is not an argument. You need something else to turn that conclusion into an argument. What's that other thing? The reasons, yeah, reasons. So all an argument is your claim or your opinion, right, with reasons to back it up. Now I know you said that, but you said it in a very technical way, so that's why I'm saying that. An argument is simply your claim with evidence to back it up, right? So for example, if I say, I believe God exists, okay? Well, that's just a claim, right? But it's not an argument. But if I now give reasons for why I believe that, evidences, now I've made an argument, okay? So notice there's nothing argumentative about an argument. Don't think like bickering, yelling, and shouting. Rather, an argument is something that we often do all the time. Like if you go home after this conference and say, hey, what should we do for dinner? Hey, let's go to Tim Hortons. Or whatever. I know you go to Tim Hortons. I want to go there because I haven't been there in years. So, like, wait, why do I go to Tim Hortons dinner? Because I have a gift card. Free Tim Hortons. Like $10 worth of free stuff. Okay, great. So you just made an argument. Maybe not very compelling, but you gave a claim. You showed it to Tim Hortons. And the evidence is, or the reason is because you have a gift card. If my son says, hey, Dad, can I play Call of Duty? Why? So when I say why, I'm asking for a reason. Is it because all my friends are online currently and I want to, play against them? Okay, so you just made an argument. Hey, let's paint the family room blue. Why? Because it'll make the color of the couch stand out better. That's an argument, right? So we make arguments all day long, probably dozens of them all throughout the day. I like to use the analogy of a house. A house is like an argument, right? So the claim is like the roof, right? That's like what you believe to be true or your opinion. But notice a roof on the ground is not a house, right? Don't ever buy such a property. You need walls to hold up the roof, right? Because your walls are your reason, your evidence, right? Is everybody clear on what an argument is? Because this is essential to understanding the most important point I'm going to make about this talk. Pretty clear on what an argument is? So argument is simply your opinion with evidence to back it up. Okay. So here's the key question. What is the burden of proof? Can anyone give me a definition for the burden of proof? And this is a phrase that's often used in legal settings, but not necessarily doesn't have to be, but you know what the burden of proof is? Yeah.
The person making the argument needs to prove why the argument is true.
Yes, exactly. So the way I put it, you're absolutely right. It's the responsibility that someone has to give evidence for their claim, for their view. Okay? And the way it works is the way you expressed it, which is this. The person who makes the claim bears the burden of proof. Whoever makes the claim, it's their job to give evidence for their view. It's not the other person's job to refute against it. So in the States, we have this idea, this principle of justice, innocent until proven guilty, right? You have that as well in Canada, right? So, can I pick on you? What's your name? Peter. So if I claim Peter stole my car, Peter said, no, I didn't steal your car, Alan. I'm like, yeah, you stole my car. You're like, I did not steal your car, Alan. You drive an old Honda CR-V. Why would I steal that? I'm like, no, you stole my car. So we go to court, right? Now we're in court. Now, who is responsible for presenting evidence for their view first? Is it me or Peter? Me. And the reason is because I'm the one who made the claim, it's my responsibility to give evidence for my claim. He does not have to say anything. So suppose I present zero evidence that my claim that he stole my car is true. Does he have to respond at all at that point? No. He can walk out of that courtroom and be completely innocent. So, because the person who makes the claim, me, is the one who bears the burden of proof. I'm the one, I've presented a roof, I now have to give walls to that roof. But if I don't present any walls, any evidence, then I haven't made an argument. I've just given my opinion. And thankfully, we don't allow people to just offer opinions and those be like binding, right? Otherwise, they can claim all kinds of things and now all of a sudden you're on the hook, right? Now, suppose I have my phone and I'm like, hey, look, I have the Ring. You guys have Ring, those video cameras? So I'm like, hey, look, here's some video footage of you breaking into my garage. It's in my car. Now, I've given evidence for my claim that he stole my car. Now I've made an argument. Then and only then is Peter obligated to respond. Okay? So, having said that, here's something that I want we Christians to stop doing. And it's the number one mistake we make when we engage non-Christians about our faith. And on your notes, it says no more free rides. And this is what a free ride looks like that we need to stop doing. A Christian and a non-Christian are talking, and the non-Christian says something like, all religions are basically the same. Now, is that an opinion, or is that an opinion with evidence to back it up? It's just an opinion, right? It's just a claim. It's just a roof on the ground. So they haven't made an argument, but here's how the Christian responds oftentimes. They'll say, oh, no. All religions are not the same. Because you see, in Christianity, Jesus is the Son of God. And in Islam, he's not the Son of God, he's just a prophet. And in Judaism, he's not the Son of God or a prophet, he's just a human being. So you see, they can't be the same because they contradict each other. And the Christian goes on for 5 or 10 minutes trying to refute a person's opinion. This is giving them a free ride. By that, I mean they are taking on the burden of proof when it doesn't belong to them. They have no obligation to say anything. If someone has just given their opinion, let them shoulder the burden of proof. Let them give evidence for their view to turn their view into an argument before you feel compelled to respond. Because if you don't, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go around life thinking that you have to respond to every wild story and claim that someone can spin. And it's too easy for non-Christians to whip up all kinds of objections, all kinds of claims with no evidence to back them up. And now what? We're obligated to respond to them? That's an impossible burden to bear. If I went around life thinking that I had to respond to every claim a person makes against my faith convictions, I would never want to share my faith. Because it's impossible. It's too easy to whip up a claim that's not grounded in reality. And what, now we have to respond to it? No, that's not legit, right? By the way, you know it weren't working the other way. If you claimed the Bible's the Word of God, what are they going to say? Prove it, right? Because they're not going to just accept that. They'll put the burden of proof on you, which is the appropriate response, by the way, right? So we need to, as Christians, stop taking on the burden of proof when it doesn't belong to us. And the way to solve that is to allow Columbo to help you out. And here's the key Columbo question you want to learn. This is the second Columbo question. How did you come to that conclusion? If someone presents their opinion, if someone presents their claim, if someone presents their view, and they haven't made an argument, they haven't given reasons for that, your question should be, interesting opinion. Thank you for your claim. How did you come to that conclusion? And what you're doing is you're asking them to provide walls to the roof they just presented. You're asking them to give reasons for their claim. And you're not taking on the burden of proof when the burden of proof does not belong to you. Now, again, it doesn't have to be those exact words. If you want your words to be, tell me how you came to believe that, or why should I believe that, or why. Those all work. But again, I like to memorize something so it becomes easier to say when I'm in a more aggressive or hostile situation. So I just say, hey, thank you for sharing with me your opinion. Hey, how did you come to that conclusion? And then I wait and listen for an answer because I don't want to give them a free ride. So people say, hey, Alan, the Bible's been translated and retranslated so many times, you can't possibly know that what the biblical authors wrote is what we have in our Bibles today. Is that an argument or is that a claim? It's a claim, just a claim. There's no evidence for that yet that they presented. They just made the claim that the Bible has been, that this has happened to it. So should I respond with a 5 or 10 minute refutation of the person's claim? No, because that would be giving them what? A free ride, that's right. And that means you're taking on the burden when it doesn't belong to you. So when someone says this to me, I thank them for their opinion, and I calmly say, and how did you come to that conclusion? And then I wait and listen for them to give me evidence for their view. I wait to see if they have walls to bring up to hold up that roof. People say to me things like, well, Alan, Jesus taught reincarnation after he traveled to India. Really? You don't have to be a scholar or a historian or a Jesus expert. Like, your question should be, how did you come to that conclusion? Yeah. And then wait and listen for an answer. Because that's not an argument, that's just a claim. It might be true, it might not be. But it's definitely not an argument. So you're asking them to provide walls for that roof on the ground. Stephen Hawking, Lawrence Krauss, many astrophysicists say stuff like this. The universe came into existence by itself. Okay, thank you for sharing me your opinion. Hey, how did you come to that conclusion? All religions are basically the same. How did you come to that conclusion? The Bible is full of fables and myths. How did you come to that conclusion? Every living thing came from a single cell life form. How did you come to that conclusion? Science has proven the Bible wrong. How did you come to that conclusion? Notice every single one of those statements is just a claim. It's no problem. People are allowed to believe these things, allowed to have these opinions. Just don't treat them like arguments. Otherwise, you're taking on the burden of proof when it doesn't belong to you. You're giving them a free ride, and you're making your task of evangelism 100 times harder than it needs to be. Okay. Now, this question, again, has all the benefits of questions in general. It shows interest in your view, it buys you valuable time, it gives you more material to work with, and it graciously assumes that they have reasons for their view, and they're not just simply emoting. But do not be surprised if when you ask them, how did you come to that conclusion, they give you a blank stare. You know why? Because they're not used to Christians asking a very basic, logical, and fair question. How did you come to that conclusion? So they'll say, well, the Bible's been translated and retranslated so many times you can't possibly know what it says. And I'll say to them, really, how did you come to that conclusion? And I'm not kidding. Oftentimes they'll say this. Oh, well, I saw this meme on Facebook that I'm sorry, what did you just say? Well, I was reading these memes on Facebook, and it said that it's had that written out. I'm like, wait, so you just believe what you read on Facebook? On memes? Like, come on, like, that's not an argument. That's a claim, right? See, they're not used to it because they're so used to Christians giving them a free ride. They're so used to whipping up any objection, the Bible's been translated and retranslated so many times, and throwing it out like it's a grenade into the room with the Christian. And the Christian's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do this grenade? Oh my gosh, freak out. I got to refute this claim. No, you don't. Because if you try to refute a mere claim, you're taking on the burden of proof and you're giving them a free ride. And you're making it 100 times harder than it needs to be. So let Columbo help you out. And this, basically, the Columbo question will shift the burden of proof back on them where the burden of proof belongs. This is not a trick. This is not clever sophistry. This is the logical, reasonable, gracious thing to do. And as I said, I guarantee you, if you tell them God's real, well, they're going to say to you, prove it. What's your evidence for that? What are they doing? They're just making me shoulder the burden of proof, which would be appropriate. Okay? So we're not doing anything that they wouldn't do, and again, I think it's the reasonable, logical thing to do. Now, what if though? Oh no, I do have it. So take a look at the number of statements I've heard recently as I engage non-Christians. These are all the last 2 years. I think the first, all wars have been started by religion. Is that an argument or is that a claim? It's a claim. Should you respond to it by a 5-minute explanation as to why it's false? No, because if you did, you'd be giving them what? Free ride. So what question could you ask that reverses the burden of proof? Well, what do you mean by that would be the first one, which tells you what to believe, but yeah, how did you come to that conclusion? Right. Yeah, hey, I mean, it's okay, they can believe it. There's nothing wrong with them having holding that view, but just don't treat it like an argument. What about the next one? The theory of evolution explains the way all species emerged. Is that a claim or is it an argument? It's a claim. They're allowed to believe it. Should you respond to that claim with like a 10-minute explanation as to why that claim is false? No, because that would be giving them a free what? Right. So what question could you ask that reverses the burden of proof? How did you come to that conclusion? How about this? God can't exist if evil and suffering exist. Claim or argument? Okay, what question did you ask? How did you come to that conclusion? Do you see a pattern here? Muhammad was a prophet of God. What question could you ask? How did you come to that conclusion? The Bible's been corrupted. How did you do it? Homosexuality is the same, as normal and healthy as heterosexuality. That's right. All of these, they're just claims. Again, there's no problem with people believing them. Just don't treat them as if they're arguments. Don't try to refute them or respond to them, because now you're just taking on the burden when the burden does not belong to you. Now, what if, though, you ask them, how did you come to that conclusion? And they say, oh, let me tell you. And they give you reasons. They give you evidence. Now they've turned their claim into an argument. They've turned their roof on the ground into a legitimate house. Then, and only then, should you feel any compulsion to try to respond to show why their argument is mistaken. If you can. But what if they present an argument where you're like, I have no idea how to respond to that? Okay. Here's what I do. Here's what you should do. First, acknowledge their point. Say, hey, that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing with me that argument. I've never heard that before. And then I say, can I get back to you? Can I think about that argument for a couple days? And then maybe I'll see you at Easter or whatever. And I've never had anybody say to me at that point, no, Alan, I need an answer right now. Show me. Everyone's like, sure, go home, think about it, whatever. So then I go home and I research that topic or that challenge. Maybe I go to our website, str.org, which, by the way, we have tons of free content. ColdCaseChristianity.com is the website of J. Warner Wallace, who's a cold case homicide detective, good friend of mine. great resources there. If maybe the objection that you've raised is more philosophically complex, then reasonablefaith.org is the website for William Lane Craig, perhaps the top Christian debater on earth. So get your answer, do your research, and then when you see your Uncle Bob or whoever it is you're talking to again, you say, hey, Uncle Bob, I was thinking about that argument you presented to me last week, and it occurred to me that, and then give a response. So you don't have to have the answer right away. Just say, hey, thanks for your argument. Let me think about that. I'll get back to you. Do your research, come back and see them later on, and then you can give your response. By the way, if you do this every time you run across an objection and an argument that you don't know how to answer, if you keep doing this approach, after a couple of years, you know what you're going to have? A fantastic education. You will have learned so much. And what you'll discover is people bring up the same objections over and over and over again. The reason why you'll see any of the speakers who are here today, why you can go up to them and ask them some random question about some random topic you thought no one's ever heard of, and they give like a 5-point outline answer off the top of their head, it's not because we're geniuses. It's just because we've been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years, right? So what you'll find is someone will say to you, hey, I have an objection. They'll raise the objection, an argument. And you'll say, I got to get back to you. No, I don't. I've heard this before. I can give a response right now, and pretty soon you'll be just like every one of us who's a speaker here. Because again, it's nothing, we're not special anyway. We've just been doing this where we come across an objection, we look up the answer, we give a response, and we're like, oh, yeah. And lots of people just seem to ask the same questions. So notice then, 2 key questions that you can learn, 2 Columbo questions. What do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? You can use these 2 questions in any situation that you could ever find yourself in. Because remember the promise that I gave you at the beginning? I'm going to give you a game plan that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, on any topic, no matter how little you know about the topic, and no matter how articulate, educated, or aggressive the other person you're talking to might be. Here's your game plan. memorize and learn 2 key questions. What do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? You can use this on anyone in any topic. I mean, suppose you're getting on a flight, let's say from Toronto to, like my flight, to San Diego. You're gonna come visit me, right? So flying from Toronto to San Diego, it's like a 5-hour flight. So you're like, oh yeah, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm so jazzed about this Equip conference I was at. I'm gonna, open up my Bible when I'm on the plane and start reading it. Maybe the person sitting next to me might see me reading it and ask me a question. I can share my faith, Okay, practice what I learned at this conference, right? And by the way, that always happens because we all do this, right? You're in a plane seat, you're sitting down, and somebody opens up a book or a laptop next to you. What do? Right? But you don't turn your head because that's too obvious. You want to be subtle about it so they can't tell you're looking. So you just use your eyes to look, right? Well, everyone does that, right? Even when you open up your laptop or you read a book, they're all checking out what you're reading, right? So you're like, okay, I'm going to take advantage of that social dynamic. I'm going to whip my Bible. Maybe they'll ask me, right? So you get in the plane, you sit in the middle, there's 2 people on either side of you. You whip out your Bible, you're like, okay, I'm going to make my move now, right? So you whip out your Bible, start reading the Gospels, right? And then you start to notice the person sitting next to you, they're doing that thing. And you're like, oh, I got a live one. You're all excited, right? So the plane takes off, and you're like, okay, I'm going to make my move right now. Okay, here it goes. Hey, I noticed you're checking out what I'm reading here. Would you mind if I told you about Jesus, who I'm reading about here in the Gospels? And as you're saying that, you're looking at the person next to you, and it turns out they're Richard Dawkins, the most famous atheist on earth. And you're thinking to yourself, oh no, I'm going to die. And my response to you is, no, you're not. Because you know who's got your back?
Columbo.
Yes, Columbo! Everyone's always like, Jesus. Like, yeah, Jesus. He's really close. Yeah, Columbo's got your back. Just go into Columbo mode. Just be like, you're outgunned, right? You're not going to go head toe-to-toe with Richard Dawkins. I mean, even if you know more about him on something, he's just got such rhetorical skill, he's probably going to outmaneuver you anyway. So just go into Columbo mode. Be like, Professor Dawkins, hey, what do you mean by that? Oh, I see. Define for me that term? Okay. Hey, how did you come to that conclusion? Oh, okay. Just Columbo him to death, okay? So, like I said, this is your game plan that you can use in any conversation, anyone, no matter how little you know about the subject. So a couple closing thoughts here and we'll be dismissed. So I live in San Diego, which is right next to a lot of military bases. And so a lot of my friends are in the military, the Marines, Air Force, whatever. And so they often tell me this, Alan, the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in battle, right? Which is the idea that the more you practice in a safe environment with your buddies and your friends, you're less likely to then get injured when you're in the real battlefield and bleed. And this is the same with tactics, specifically the Columbo tactic. Use these questions today, tomorrow, use them every day. Let them become a part of your vocabulary so that when you're in a more hostile situation, those words flow out far more naturally than if you never say them until you're in that moment, okay? Just make it, because again, you can use this with anybody, right? 2, don't feel compelled, and just bear with me, don't kill me for saying this. This sounds very not Christian, right? Don't feel compelled to present the gospel in every conversation. I think a lot of us Christians have this idea that if we're talking to a non-believer, if we don't bring up the gospel in that conversation, we're a total failure, right? So either one of 2 things happens. Number 1, we walk away from these conversations feeling guilty all the time. I'm such a failure to present the gospel. Or 2, we try to force the gospel into a conversation where it's completely unnatural and awkward. Maybe your friend just bought a new truck. You're like, hey man, that's a cool truck. Like, what kind is it? He's like, yeah man, it's a Ford. You're like, oh, why did you buy a Ford instead of a Toyota? He's like, well, because I really like the style of the Fords and I thought some of the resale value in the Fords is better. So that's why I chose to buy a Ford. And you're all, oh, I can see why you chose to buy a Ford. Why don't you also choose to follow Jesus Christ? Where did that come from? You were just talking about cars and trucks, and now you were talking about Jesus? Don't be that guy or gal that tries to shoehorn the gospel in a conversation where it's so awkward, Instead, make this your goal. Make it your goal to put a stone in their shoe. You know when you get a stone in your shoe, every time you walk, that stone pokes you in the sole of your foot, and you can't stop thinking about it. So my suggestion to you is make it your goal to use the Columbo tactic to engage people in conversation with good questions, such that you put a stone in their shoe, a stone in their soul, that'll poke them in their soul, right? And then the Holy Spirit can then use to convict them of that idea or the point you're trying to make. I'll close with this. I like what Mother Teresa says in her book, Love, a Fruit Always in Season. She says, God's not called me to be successful. He's called me to be faithful. In other words, it's not our job to convince people of our arguments or to make them into Christians. Okay? That's God's job. Our job is to present the truth in a clear and persuasive way, in a gracious and loving way, and then we leave the result up to God. In other words, don't be committed to the end result of them changing their mind and becoming Christian. Just be committed to your part of the equation, which is to be an ambassador for Jesus Christ, 2 Corinthians 5:20, right? To proclaim the message of reconciliation, and then let the Holy Spirit do his job in the life of the person you're talking to. Okay? And that's what I mean by that. Just be faithful to your role. Don't worry about the success. And I think if you do that, we consider what you're doing successful by virtue of the fact that you're being a faithful ambassador for Jesus Christ. Okay, let's do a couple questions here. Any questions, comments, concerns? Yeah.
What's the professor's ploy?
Oh, professor's ploy, yeah. So the professor's ploy is a situation where you reverse the burden of proof, but then they reverse it back on you. And this happens oftentimes in a university setting. A professor will be talking about Canadian history, and all of a sudden he'll stop and he'll start bashing the Bible. The Bible's full of fables and myths. And everyone in the lecture hall is like, wait a minute, what? I thought we were talking about Canadian history. Like, what's going on? So there might be a Christian in the audience, raises his hand and says, Professor, wait a minute. You were just talking about history, and now you're bashing the Bible. And you said the Bible's full of fables and myths. Can you give us some evidence as to why that's true? Now, in that case, the student's using the Columbo tactic. He's asking, show me the evidence. Give me roof, give me walls to roof. But here's what the professor does, because he's smart. He's had Christians come and go for decades into his classroom, and here's how he responds. The professor says, young man, thank you for that question. I appreciate you asking that question. Listen, I'm not here to impose my views on everyone else. I'm an open-minded kind of guy. I'm willing to consider other people's beliefs and values as well. So young man, we will give you the free opportunity here to present the reasons why you believe the Bible is trustworthy and true. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Now, notice what the professor just did?
Yeah.
Right? He just put the burden of proof back on the student. But that's not where the burden belongs, right?
Right.
Because the professor's the one who made the claim, it's his job. So if you're in that situation, you would say, wait a minute, professor, you're the one who made the claim, so you got to back up what you said. I never said anything about my views. You know, you're the teacher, we're the students. You know, do you have any evidence to back up what you said, or should we just take everything you say on faith? No, don't say that. But now this can happen in an ordinary conversation. You know, you're over at Uncle Bob's house, you know, the week before Easter or whatever, or at Easter, and Uncle Bob's like, you know, all religions are basically the same. And you're like, Uncle Bob, how did you come to that conclusion? And Uncle Bob's like, so you think Christianity is the only true religion? Prove it. You're like, well, wait a minute, I didn't say anything. I just asked you why you believe what you believe. But now he's turned it around on you to force you to defend the claim that only Christianity is true. So you see how it's reversed? You know? So that's a professor's ploy. Yeah, one more and we'll be dismissed. Yeah.
So in the public school system today, kids are encouraged to identify however they like. You could be Sally one day and
Yes.
Sam the next day and Stacy and then
I understand, yeah.
Samuel. How, obviously this isn't for little kids, but you know, you meet someone who was born a woman and is now identifying male. How do you walk through this same argument or conversation when everything is about feelings? You can't, there is no evidence. It's how I feel. I've always thought this way. I always didn't think I fit in.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to be talking about that actually on the main stage for the final talk, but I won't be addressing that specific question you're asking. I mean, remember, the Columbo tactic is not an argument. It's just a methodology of how to engage. It's about asking questions. So in that situation, and I'm not going to have time to explore this all, but I would be very inclined to just want to ask her, hey, you're saying that you feel like a girl, right? I'm just going to just kind of rush through this conversation. You say that you feel like a girl, like, what would that mean if I felt like something that I'm not? Would you also grant that, you know, that that's legitimate? Like, for example, what if I felt like I was unhealthily overweight when I'm actually very, very thin, right? Which is a situation called anorexia, right? So in anorexia, you feel a certain way, you have a perception of your body image that's mistaken. But we don't grant that as legitimate just because you feel that way. So notice I'm asking a question that challenges their idea of, oh, well, just because I feel this way doesn't mean I am this way. So I would use questions like that. Now, again, we talk about the school system, and there's all kinds of questions about rules and, you know, employment requirements, so I'm not getting into all that. But just generally speaking, if I'm talking to a person who identifies as trans, non-binary, I want to engage them with questions. Tell me more about that, you know? What do you mean by that? How did you come to the conclusion that you are a woman? Like, how do you know what a woman feels like if you're biologically male? Like, tell me more about that. So I would spend a lot of time asking questions, kind of like Schaefer was saying. 55 minutes asking questions, 5 minutes sharing the truth. So that's how I divided that time. Such an important question, though. Thank you. All right, Tyler, what do you got for us?
Oh, awesome. Well, let's thank our speakers.
Real quick, by the way, if you like what you're here, if you like what I'm talking about, we mail out a free training article every 2 months. If you put your phone to this QR code, it'll take you to a place where you can sign up for free training. It's either snail mail or emailed to you. It's called Solid Ground. That's the name of the article. And my boss writes it every 2 months. Awesome. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's perfect.
Yeah.